Good afternoon. I hope you are enjoying your online quiet day so far. And I hope that Oliver's talk has inspired you to keep pilgrimage alive in the busyness of life. For those of us in the northeast of England, we are blessed to have so many pilgrim routes and destinations. Lindisfarne, Heavenfield, Whitby, and of course Durham Cathedral. These divine paths that our beloved saints would have walked themselves in life or in death, all of which have been walked upon over hundreds of years as we strive to gain something of their saintliness. And sitting alongside these are the forgotten paths, the paths trodden by miners on their way down to the pit, the paths of the workers on their way to the shipyards, the well-worn paths to chapel through the fields. These paths equally divine, for surely the whole of creation is imbued with divine grace, as the 13th century mystic Bonaventure reminds us. His masterpiece, The Soul's Journey into God, captures the Franciscan view that all creation is filled with the presence of God. And when we think about pilgrimage in its broadest sense, it should, at the very least, have a focus, no matter the path. For pilgrimage has three parts. First, to the place, then back again, and then thirdly, to the ongoing pilgrimage towards heaven, that place of Christian hope, where Christ has conquered death and God will make all things new. And to help us ponder this, I would like to introduce Kieran Carter, who is a young historian who, inspired by a passion for the region, has set up online the largest Northeast heritage website, which he so generously offers to us for free, with a desire to amplify the story of those generations that has gone before us. But what also captivated me was that as he wrote about these places, he also went on pilgrimages to them, and moreover, he welcomes and encourages others to join him on his pilgrimages. So welcome, Kieran, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for inviting me. That was such a lovely thing to say.
What's so exciting about your passion, Kieran, is that your walks speak to the human urge to leave home, to physically go to a place in order to establish ties with the divine or to gain physical or spiritual healing. I must say that's very refreshing in a world that seems dominated by the internet. And I'm wondering what your motivations were.
So the big motivations for me, finishing university, I really wanted to connect with my surroundings. I wanted to understand the world. I wanted to contextualize it for myself and actually feel it, to respect it, and to memorialize, because the northeast of England is such an important place to this country that I feel it deserves the respect, not to sit on my computer, not to spend all my time researching and reading books. It's to get out there and feel the grass and breathe the air and understand the world around us. And also, as a wider sense, I wanted the project to be free and accessible and be a really easy gateway for anyone to understand the landscapes and the people around them. Because I don't feel like there's too many of them nowadays. I feel like most gateways into this kind of interest can be quite toxic. It can be quite difficult to get into. So yeah, my motivations were twofold. It was for me to understand, and it was also to make sure everyone else had a place where they could understand in an accessible environment.
Wonderful, thank you. Your historic walks, or as I'll call the pilgrimages, have involved visiting lots of Methodist chapels that kind of dot the northeast landscape. I was brought up in a Methodist chapel, and I know them very well. And they've served faithfully our mining communities in the past, and they continue to do so. And I'm wondering what intrigued you to these places, because we also have beautiful Anglo-Saxon churches. We have very historical little chapels and churches.
Yeah, thanks for that question. Of course, beauty is subjective. So, of course, we have like the big Gothic cathedrals, the big kind of Norman structures. But yeah, a lot of these colliery chapels and little Methodist kind of places of worship are just simple stone or brick buildings that have not very fanciful decoration, but I guess that's the point, really. But I think they're just as gorgeous. And often they set the scene for the environment they're in, and often they're made with local bricks and local stone, often donated by the collieries and things itself. But you're absolutely right. Some of them are still in use, but a lot of them are simply forgotten, kind of foreboding relics of a time that doesn't really exist anymore. Communities might have walked away from them because the congregations simply aren't big enough to sustain them, and they remain kind of like as a monument to a time that we don't really have anymore. So back in the day, so a lot of these Methodist chapels started cropping up in the 1820s, maybe even earlier in the villages. But as the collieries got bigger, you started seeing them a lot more through to the 1920s. And they didn't just act as places of worship; they also acted as community centres, effectively. They were places for lectures. They were places for people to congregate and meet as friends. They were places where people formed organisations and societies and clubs. So they underpinned the whole of the village and kind of like the heartbeat of it. You had the place to work, which was the pit, but you had the place to spend time and speak to people and understand people, which was the church. And I mentioned, yes, there's some active, there's some ruined, like at Chiltern Moor, not too far from you. I think it's in Horn. That one is from the mid 19th century, and that one's ruined, just sat in the middle of the village, kind of loved. But there's some that gets repurposed. So, for example, there's one in Guidepost near Bellington, and that's turned into a fish and chip shop. And there's others that turn into like garages and things like that. So some of them still have a purpose, and some of them still underpin that community. But a lot of them are still absolutely gorgeous, but have somehow kind of lost the way. And I guess my efforts are to bring attention to them so people know exactly the role that they've played within those villages and those communities, because they're just so important to lose and so important to forget about. I know you mentioned the people as well. In terms of the people, most people went to church. Most people in the colliery villages were Methodists, as you're aware. It was an everyday task like putting the washing out. Like it was just something that everyone did. Whether it be a small child, whether it be the man, whether it be the pitman after work or maybe on a Sunday. But there's quite notable figures that were part of the Methodist movement in the North East. So, for example, there was a man called Thomas Glassy. He was a preacher at the Choppington Unitarian Chapel, and he went on to form the Australian Labour Party. And then one of his friends was Thomas Burt, who you might have heard of, who was the first working class MP in Britain. And he was an active member of the Choppington Church as well, and he visited quite a lot of them. So it just goes to show that these were kind of just a microcosm of society itself and the real beating heart. They were the arteries where people kept informed, where people perhaps politically radicalised like Thomas Burt, or perhaps simply just found their way in life through Methodism, through Christianity.
Yes, I love that line you said when you are bringing back the stories of these people. And of course, this is keeping alive their memories. But as you do this, you are resurrecting those stories for a newer generation. And of course, that's the point, isn't it? I think that's what I find so intriguing about your walks. Your goal is to remember these stories, because how do we know ourselves as people in this region without knowing our past? And that goes wherever you come from. You have to remember those stories. I wonder if there's any particular places or walks that have moved you the most, where you may have felt that deep connection between you and those who have gone before.
There's a story that I've really wanted to share, and there is quite a lot of places I've been where that layer for me that you talk about is really thin, in the sense that you can feel the history and the spirituality that came before with the people that tread those paths. So, for example, one of my favourite places is on the River Wansbeck. I did a walk a couple of years ago from somewhere called Bothell, which is near Morpeth, to Sheepwash, which is near Ashington. It's laden with spiritual landmarks and holy wells, and there's a lady chapel from the 14th century that was established by the Ogle family who lived in the nearby castle. It's gorgeous and it's laden with garlic and it's only ruins now. It's absolutely beautiful. But the main reason this walk, or I always think about this walk and I feel really connected to it, was a story from the 1870s. Now, it involves a vicar who doesn't seem like a very nice vicar, because he wanted to build a villa near his church on a footpath that had existed for centuries prior. That was used by school children, that was used by the pitmen travelling between the collieries and things. And it was the easiest way between Bothwell and Sheepwash. Now he was quite irritated by hearing the noises and seeing the sights of the pitmen walking back and forth to work every day. And in retaliation to this motion that he was putting forward to close the footpath that had existed for centuries, the pitmen invited the Longhurst Colliery Brass Band to march along the footpath to protest its closure. So they sung hymns, they sung the Mater hymn, they sung Auld Lang Syne, and they marched all across this path with a brass band in protest of this vicar that wanted to build his villa at the footpath. And it turned out a lot of people celebrated with them. And newspaper reports state there was just under 2,000 people that turned out between these two villages to celebrate the path that they trodden on for hundreds of years, to celebrate their forefathers, which is actually quoted, that this is the path of our forefathers. And I just find it such a romantic and such a positively visceral story, because I think it just embodies everything we think about congregation and solidarity, and all of these people, no matter what occupation they are, no matter what age they are, where they are in life, they all turned out for this common purpose that they have, which is this path that they experience from being kids at school all the way through to working and eventually dying as well. Because apparently it was used as a coffin path as well to the church. So it's something I always hark back to, and unfortunately I can't find any information of what happened after, apart from the fact it's no longer there. So it seems like this vicar won. You can go in the beginning of the path through the field, which you can still see. You can still see the path, and it's that layer that you talk about, that thin layer between heaven and earth. You can really feel it at that point, because you can almost hear the trombones, and you can hear the music, because it's just such a romantic story that you can make it into a short film. It always moves me, and I'm really aiming to go back, especially in the sunshine. It rides across the Wansbeck, and that's something that really draws to me, because it's just so romantic, and it's exactly what the Northeast is. It's a coming together of peoples. It's a celebration, and it's ultimately a congregation in whichever sense you want to take from that.
That's so beautiful, and I will link that story in this video. And if you want, people who are watching want to read the story, please do, because it's extraordinary. In the Christian tradition, on our feast days, on special days, we do a lot of walking around the cathedral. In the more liturgical traditions of the church, we don't normally sit for a while. We do a lot of standing and walking. We process to shrines. Recently, we processed to St. Bede on St. Bede's Day, and we had Holy Communion on his tomb, and we walk the way of the saints. A lot of Christians will go on pilgrimages, and we're doing all this to remember, because how we remember really embodies the Christian story. We remember because we want to remember the reality of something, not just what's gone before, but we're keeping alive the reality of the Christian hope that death never has the last word. And I'm just wondering, on some of your walks, you did speak about this a little bit before, I'm wondering where you've seen new life, even in those places like the Category D villages. And if you wouldn't mind just explaining what they are for our listeners, that'd be really helpful.
Absolutely. So this is such a regional phenomenon that didn't really happen elsewhere. So Category D villages, obviously the history of Durham is that it was laden with collieries and industry, And as a result of these pits, little villages sprung out of them. So long rows of terraces quite literally flanked and surrounded the pits to provide accommodation for the people that worked there, because often they were in the rurality, they were in the fields, they were in the countryside where it's impossible to reach from a major settlement. So a lot of these were established in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, and a lot of the houses still remained there right until the 1950s. So what happened in the 1950s in Durham? There was a real push for people to move into what we call new towns. So these were brand new settlements, places like Peterlee, where the council really wanted to move people into because it was fresh and modern accommodation. It had all of the amenities they needed, and ultimately it was cheaper because a lot of these houses that these people lived in didn't have running water. Their toiletries were outside. They were cramped and they were falling to bits. So the council also wanted to move them. And the reason they're called category D is because there was 4 different degrees of change that the council were willing to put into it. So category A, no change. Category B, maybe upgrade it. Category C, serious kind of upgrades and maintenance and things. Whereas category D were the villages where they were no longer investing or funding any money whatsoever. And as these people moved out, there was essentially demolishing the villages. And there are some to this day that were totally flattened and no longer exist because of this demolition. So throughout the 1950s and 60s, a lot of these villages started to vanish or went from a population of hundreds of people to perhaps dozens of people because it simply, the incentive wasn't there to live anymore. Now, with this, the tradition of these places were lost. There was 150, maybe 200 years of tradition that built up through communities and families and forefathers who worked in these collieries, whose blood and sweat was drawn into the ground that they lived on. And unfortunately, some of these have lost. So last year, I set on a walk to visit, I think it was about 71 of these villages. That's quite a lot. So it was a walk from Newburn to Spennymoor, dotting myself around all of these different villages. Some of them just a simple pit row that had either vanished or been repurposed, or sometimes in ruins. And one particular village that really strikes me is Addison. So Addison's near somewhere called Clara Vale, just on the Tyne. It's near kind of Dunstan, Brighton area between there. Now, Addison was quite a big pit village. So it surrounded Addison Colliery, and it had a school. I think it had 2 chapels. It had a Wesleyan and it had a primitive chapel. It had all the amenities you'd expect from a village. But because these terraces were so old and so warm, it was classified as a D. So it was eventually cleared and totally wiped. But what replaced it is this gorgeous wood. So there's no kind of houses here or there anymore. It's all just a wood, but you can still see some of the brickwork from the houses. You can still see the incline of the railway. You can still see the tunnel that led up the hill to somewhere called Stargate. And what you mentioned about these places coming back to life, it really emphasizes this point to me, and I say it to absolutely everyone, that the landscape is a living and breathing thing that is never static. It's constantly changing. And this quite grimy area, but full of life, full of children playing, full of men going to work, full of women chattering away, doing the washing and making the dinner for their husbands coming home. It's now evolved into a really peaceful and serene wood. And when I was there was a deer just walking about 10 meters away from me. And the juxtaposition in the space of 60 years from when the colliery closed is incredible. And you can really feel that nature has returned to that settlement. And it just shows that this kind of the landscape is so vivid and also connects us to it because we can still see the remains of this pit village, but what's risen from it is something of beauty. So that's one really prime example of, though of course there are others that are a lot sadder than that. But it's certainly worth going online and searching these places and maybe visiting them so we can remember the people that lived there, because there's still people alive that used to live in them. Remember their stories and understand kind of the plight that they went through, but also appreciate the change and appreciate kind of the landscape itself and reforming itself and connecting to it in a way. I think that's really gorgeous.
Lovely, thank you. That was wonderful. When we think about pilgrimage, the Greek in ancient Greek, pilgrimage is translated to veneration, in plain English, respect or encounter. And because what you're doing goes beyond a walk, it really does kind of, the word pilgrimage does kind of encapsulate all that you're doing, I think. But going on pilgrimage should change you. I'm just wondering if that feels like that rings true with your experiences, because your walks and your commitment to sharing our history means that there's an added layer to your walks.
I totally agree with you. And I remember saying on that particular walk that I did last year that it was a pilgrimage, because you could embrace the connection that our forefathers, the pitmen that came before people like me, walked between all of these villages, home and work and back and forth, and these places really meant something. And the reason I really think the pilgrimage is because fundamentally history is trying to understand and empathize with the experiences that came before. That's the point. It's to understand and appreciate why things are where they are, why people did the things they did. And through walking these paths and just trying to understand the landscape around us, we gain that respect, we gain that pride, we gain that kind of virtue of knowing that we belong where we are. And it's really impacted me, obviously, with these walks, but also having a child, getting married. It really helps cement the reason I'm here, in a sense. It really helps me understand why my area, my home, my community is the way it is. And by looking to my parents and my grandparents, it helps cement, yeah, we belong in this place and we should respect this place and we should really take pride in this place. And I think to an extent, we have lost that, maybe to an extent. Maybe we have forgotten that our communities are incredibly important, but also incredibly unique. And by looking to the past and understanding exactly why it looks the way it does and why it's formed the way it has, through history and through walking and through contextualizing, we can really build something for the future. And I think for that reason, you're exactly right. They are pilgrimages, both for our past, but also for our future as well.
That's really beautiful. And you are right. There's something unique about the Northeast. But of course, that rings true wherever we are in the world. And we were all born somewhere. We all live somewhere, whether we have a deep connection with that place or not. And I'm wondering, as we sum up, I'm wondering, do you have any insights about wherever we are in the world, how we can begin this journey of exploration, of this journey into memory, as you stated on your website, peel away the layers of history to connect that story that we're all part of?
I always love that phrase because history is like an onion. You peel away the layers to find something that's underneath it. But thank you for asking that question, because I think it's really important. What I would recommend to anyone, wherever you are, no matter if you live in the city, if you live in the countryside, you live in the town, to take a deep breath and just devote yourself a day, a weekend, to just walk in the absolute middle of nowhere, somewhere that's not necessarily familiar to you, just to try and feel and see and understand the landscape around you. and divorce and disconnect yourself from modern life. Obviously, take your phone for safety, but just tune out and kind of connect with the landscape and ask questions like, why is this path here? Who would have walked it? Why is this church here? How did this place develop, and what did it mean to the people that lived around this church? Because it is a privilege to disconnect in this day and age. Some people just simply can't, and that's fair enough. But to be able to disconnect kind of frees us from the stresses and anxieties of modern life. And if we're able to understand the world around us, it's what I said in the last question, it helps nourish that respect and belonging and pride that we can have each other in our communities as well. And I can't think of a more important principle to uphold in this day and age where things are a little bit tough and things are a little bit difficult. If we can all start to appreciate each other, but also just as important, the things that are around us, the structures, the landscape, the countryside, the cities that we live in, then personally it makes me feel the world would be a better place. So I think that's the advice I would always try and get.
Thank you so much, Kieran. That has given us so much to think about. I wonder, as you ponder what Kieran has shared with us, where are those places near to you that may be hidden? Those places that may not seem spiritual, but nevertheless are imbued with the divine and speak to that Christian hope of life after death.